morning, everyone, to this edition of the San Juan Energy IQ. I'm Jerry McHugh Jr., San Juan Resources, and welcome to this month's Improving Our Energy IQ. LNG is a hot topic in the past couple of weeks with high sky European and Asian prices, exacerbated by the Ukrainian conflict. So we'll dive in with the closest geographically planned LNG facility near the Western basins and the San Juan Basin, and hear from Sempra LNG marketing guy, Jim Diemer, on the screen here. So we'll get started. Jim, I'll let you introduce yourself, give the audience a brief lead up to where you are now, talk about Sempra, specifically what you're working on in Mexico with the conversion of the LNG facility. So welcome, Jim.
Good morning, and Jerry, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to those that have an interest in Rocky Mountain production and North American gas in general. My name is Jim Diemer. I am a Director of Market Research and Forecasting for Sempra Infrastructure. Sempra Infrastructure is the non-regulated entity of, meaning non-utility, entity of Sempra, the San Diego-based infrastructure company. So it's great to be here this morning. Some quick background on myself. I have about a 40-year career in energy with a principal focus on natural gas, although a lot of background in power. Most of the time I have spent has been as a consultant in the industry. I also had a 3-year stint at the Department of Energy, at the Energy Information Administration, also doing work for the DOE Office of Policy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. With my almost 40-year background, I'll say I've seen a lot, but and my career started when natural gas was deregulated, the commodity that is. But I also know I have not seen everything. And I think the events of the last few months is a clear demonstration of how dynamic this marketplace is, which is why it's really interesting to be in this business. About 6 years ago, I joined what at the time was called a company called Sempra LNG. I was the head of midstream commercial development. So my responsibilities was everything upstream of the LNG facility that is involved in the gas sourcing strategies for our LNG projects, any pipelines that either we take third-party capacity or we would build the pipelines ourselves, storage, things of that nature. It's everything that needed to be done to make sure that we had natural gas showing up at the flange of the LNG facilities in a competitive and reliable manner. A couple of months ago, we reorganized when Sempra Infrastructure was formed. The company sold 20% of the interest in Sempra Infrastructure to KKR. And in December, it was announced that another 10% was sold to ADIA, which is the Abu Dhabi Investment Fund. That 10% has not closed yet. So we've undergone a restructuring, and as part of that restructuring, I asked to try to do something different. And so that's why I now have this corporate function where I'm responsible for all the market research that really underpins our business strategies, our project strategies, and a lot of the economic assumptions that go into our project models. So today, I know you're keenly interested in what may help out and create new markets for San Juan production. So I think what we'll do is we'll focus on that, which largely today relates to our Energía Coastal Azul project in Ensenada, Mexico. So what I'll do, I'll share my screen just to give people context of what this project is, where it's located, and things of that nature.
And to be fair, this is, you're looking for supply from Western U.S. basins, not just San Juan, but
correct.
many other places too.
Yeah, I'll explain that a little bit. And these slides are not in any particular order, but we'll start out here with our ECA facility. So one of the advantages of Energía Coastal Azul is that it's a brownfield project. So, you know, a decade ago, or a little bit more actually, in the case of ECA, more like a decade and a half, and it wasn't just us, but it was perceived that the North American natural gas market was going to be short on gas supply. And so Energía Coastal Azul was developed as a regasification project. So in other words, it was a facility to import natural gas from other parts of the world into the Baja California market. And there was a pipeline built to then move the gas to the California border and supply Southern California. The beauty of the regas facility is that you have existing infrastructure to leverage to make it an export facility now that we've gone through the shale revolution, and it's understood that there is a lot of abundant and competitively priced natural gas in North America due to the technological breakthroughs associated with the shale revolution. And I'll say other technologies as well that have materially changed the exploration and production industry in North America. So you can leverage the port, the docking facilities, and all that infrastructure, and as well as the storage tanks that are located at the site. And what you're seeing here is a picture of that regas facility that is on the coast just south of the San Diego border.
You need to go to probably a different slide. You're on the opening slide there, Jim.
Really? So it's not following me.
Not moving, I guess so.
I just stopped sharing. Am I back on the screen?
You're on the screen with the slide.
Yeah. So let me share. I moved the slide, so let me share again. I apologize that that's not working. So I'll just do this. Do you see it now?
There you go. Perfect. Yep.
Okay. So this infrastructure here and these tanks in particular, they're quite valuable, and they can be fully leveraged to develop a liquefaction project. So we took FID at the end of 2020 on a 3 million ton facility, which is about a half a BCF a day of natural gas. This is a joint venture with Total as a minority shareholder. You know, the project has been proceeding and construction has been ongoing now at the site for a bit over a year. It's advancing as planned. There's been really no schedule issues that have developed. You know, it takes about 4 years to construct this. So we expect in the second half of 2024, the first LNG will be produced. And so we'll be going through a commissioning process, and then there will be full commercial operations in 2025. We have executed, and this is Sempra Infrastructure's strategy. We are not, I'll say we're commodity risk adverse. We're really focused on infrastructure and earning a return, a consistent return on that infrastructure. So we went ahead and we sold 2.5 of the 3 million tons on a long-term basis under sale and purchase agreements, or what's frequently referred to the industry as SPAs, to Total and Mitsui, who will basically take the LNG at what we call FOB, free on board. They will take title to that LNG as it is loaded onto the ships. Now, Now, the commercial structure of this deal, because it is an FOB type of arrangement, is that Sempra Infrastructure is responsible for procuring the feed gas and the associated transportation from wherever it is sourced to the LNG facility. And so it will effectively, then take title and will pass over to these two off-takers once it is going through that loading on and onto the ships. Okay. Let me just see, Jerry, if did the slide change, or am I still on that?
You're still
slide?
on that slide. Something must be awry on our.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing.
No, there you go. Went right there. It just went.
Oh, it did.
Yeah,
Okay.
it might be kind of slow, I guess.
All right, very good. So you're now seeing a map where we focus on Rockies gas market access.
You need to put that back up. It's not showing now.
Okay.
Our last 2 months, we had millennials on the show, and that was, man, they knew how.
Yeah, that's
they really knew how to get around on the computer. I'll tell you.
I'm not as technology savvy as
baby
my
boomers here.
30-year-old children are. Okay, so here is a map of, I'll say the Southwest, or really the Western market of the United States. Unlike the Gulf Coast, your infrastructure is far more limited here. But I'll talk for a moment in terms of what we have done and or are doing in order to source the natural gas. So is my cursor visible?
Yes. Okay.
So you see here, Energía Coastal Azul LNG facility is immediately south of San Diego. Depending upon your time at the border, it's a little bit more than an hour drive south. There is a limited pipeline network in Baja, California, Mexico. It is effectively a pipe that's 100% owned by Sempra Infrastructure. Internally, we call it GRO. It's a Gasoducto Rosarito. It is, I believe today, a 42-inch pipe that crosses the border here near Mexicali. It can go a little bit to the east to supply some load on the eastern side of Baja. And it essentially goes across the northernmost part of Baja. And then it can enter into the San Diego markets. And then there's a spur line that comes down to the LNG facility. This was originally built in order to move the gas that was intended to be imported from the rest of the world. And it would then move into the San Diego markets, and then it would come up through the North Baja project pipeline, which is a Trans-Canada owned pipeline. It's that blue pipeline here, and it would get to Ehrenberg. As many of you know, Ehrenberg is probably the most liquid natural gas point at the Southern California border. And at that point, it can go into either PG&E systems, or what isn't shown here, just because it was going to be very complex, is SoCal Gas's systems also come here at Ehrenberg. So as this is becoming a liquefaction facility, and prior to that even, because of the market conditions, the North Baja pipeline was reversed, as well as the GRO pipeline was reversed. So currently today, gas is procured or supplied at Ehrenberg. It moves down the North Baja pipeline into GRO system, and the industrial and power generation loads are fed or supplied in the Baja region. So what we are doing, because those loads are not going away, is the GRO pipeline is being expanded substantially to meet this new incremental 0.5 BCF a day load. There's some looping going on there. And then in addition, the North Baja pipeline has a North Baja Express project, of which Sempra is the customer, and we're subscribing to a 0.5 BCF a day expansion, which is largely being done through compression. So there's no new pipe being built. There's new compression being added at Ehrenberg, and that will provide for about another 0.5 BCF a day to come down and feed the Anahita Coastal Azul export project.
So you really take Ehrenberg as a key point for this area and for you, just because that's where it comes in via El Paso from Canada, from even Opal can get there. Some of those spots, is that correct?
That is correct, but because of I'll just say our broader procurement strategy, and that Ehrenberg is largely a transition point into the California markets, we have gone ahead and subscribed for capacity on El Paso's system, principally on the Southern Main Line. And our capacity reaches back into both Permian and San Juan receipt points. And,
that line, we understand part of that line is that Southern El Paso line is shut down because of a leak or a blowout, right?
There was an incident a number of months ago, and so that line has been derated. And I believe I saw a report this morning in the weekly Permian newsletter that my team does for internal consumption, that there is another outage that just occurred in the last couple of days, which is also reducing that capacity.
I see.
So yeah, that's it's a concern of ours. We are hoping, and hope is in the strategy, so we are aggressively working additional options to improve the reliability of our supplies to the project. But the main point is we have the vast majority of that 0.5 BCF a day capacity today. Our asset management group is managing that. Because the markets that they are serving from our perspective are not long-term markets for example, our LNG facility, they are largely using shorter-term contracts in order to supply the molecules that are moving through that transport. Over time, as we approach the full commissioning and the operations of the ECA facility, we will be seeking to diversify our contract portfolio to include more mid and long-term supply agreements. By mid to long-term, I'd say is 7 to 10 or more years. Midterm, I would say, are 3 to 5 years. And then we will also continue to have some shorter-term agreements, maybe just call them simple NASB agreements for incremental supplies on a shorter-term basis. So that activity, I would expect, will start in earnest probably about a year or so before the facility comes into service. So let's say, since we're talking first LNG, second half of 2024, I would expect that would be something that would be ramping up in the second half of 2023.
Okay. Wow. So you've got it kind of layered out there. I think we called it in the pregame a layer cake of contracts to move that 0.5 BCF per day.
That's correct. That's how we look at it. We do call it a layer cake. And a lot of that has to do with, we don't want too much risk concentrated in any one gas supplier. So you want diversity in terms of your suppliers, and then you also want diversity in terms of term, because if all of your contracts are expiring, at the same time, again, that creates a fair amount of risk, and also a lot of work to do at one point in time. So, what you want is a portfolio, so that you can constantly be working this and aligning your positions on gas supply with the offtake associated with the LNG facility.
So let me back up a sec. So you talked about the Ehrenberg delivery point, and you talked about, we talked earlier about the lines coming in there, and you said that we seem to be pipeline constricted there in a way, and that we have to, at least for you to expand a lot, there'd have to be a lot more pipeline build up. Can you talk a little bit about that, Jim?
Well, the reality is the vast majority of the capacity that we have subscribed to on El Paso was existing capacity. There is a small compression expansion on El Paso system for a small portion of our capacity that has been fully permitted and is an ongoing project that El Paso has on their southern leg. Where the material expansion is occurring is really south of Ehrenberg. So it's on the North Baja pipeline, their North Baja Express project. It's a half a BCF a day compression expansion. That project is still sitting at FERC awaiting its permit. We are hopeful and we are encouraged that now that the new democratically controlled commission has issued its new certificate policy statement, that certificate will move forward. We understand, the delays that have been incurred there because of the revisiting of the certificate policy statement. But now, with FERC's actions a few weeks ago, there's more clarity on that, and we hope and believe that there will be a certificate issued on that shortly. So that's a compression expansion. There still is ample time. Obviously, we want that certificate issued quickly, but since it's a compression expansion, the construction period there is about a year. So there's ample time to get that done. However, we don't want it delayed anymore, and TransCanada is extremely active at FERC in trying to advance that forward. Since it is their project, we are just the shipper. The GRO expansion, so that's the black pipeline here, which picks up all of the gas. There is no other delivery point on North Baja system. 100% of that gas, absent the fuel used by the compression, is delivered into the GRO system, which is a Sempra infrastructure pipeline. That all of the permits for that project have been issued by Mexico, and the construction for that expansion is ongoing and is on schedule.
Well, along that line, someone just sent in a question like, what is the El Paso throughput from San Juan to the Permian in approximately, usually about every day?
To be honest, I do not know that off of the top of my head. There is, as you see, the San Juan natural gas comes into El Paso's northern leg, which is up here. Now there are crossovers. Mm-hmm. The Havasu crossover, as well as there's another one that goes down from Topak here. I am not, I'll say, super current on what that is, that capacity is. Much of it is based on, your agreements for your capacity with El Paso in terms of what your primary receipt points are. And as I mentioned, we have a mix of them. And then, there is some flexibility on a secondary basis as well with your receipt points. So unfortunately, I'm not privy to all the various contracts that we have with El Paso to give you, either our exact mix or, the overall system capabilities.
Okay. So someone also on the same line noted that the San Juan basis futures have been stable in the 30-cent range, while Waha basis has grown up to around $1.
Yes.
Kind of a real switch from where it was a couple years ago.
So no, that's very true. And these are the things that, our asset management group and the risk management programs that they're going to put in place around this supply. That is something that they're very cognizant on. My team manages a lot of those fundamentals analysis. And then, of course, there's the forward markets that the asset management group is very active in. This is something we're quite cognizant of. I mean, the San Juan Basin, because of its connectivity to these broader Rocky Mountain markets, is, a lot more driven, I'll say, in large part by the seasonal loads that occur up in the Rocky Mountains, whereas the Waha is largely driven by a number of other dynamics. Overall, though, both of those markets are very much driven by the supply and demand dynamics, particularly in the Permian. With a lot of the drilling activity, you have the challenges of aligning that supply availability with takeaway capacity, right? And virtually all of the additional takeaway capacity that has occurred in the last number of years from the Permian has been to take that gas to the east, largely to the South Texas Gulf Coast. And more recently, Energy Transfer announced a project leveraging a lot of its existing capacity that comes through the North Texas markets. And then their plan is to drop it down into the Gulf Coast markets from North Texas. I believe that will then come down largely on the HPL system. Because that's an intrastate pipeline, as an advantage they have is permitting is a lot simpler in Texas versus if you go through the interstate process at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I'll say as a potential shipper or purchaser of natural gas off of those pipelines, the disadvantage of the fact that it's an intrastate pipeline means that there's less transparency around the pricing. So, it's sort of a 50-50 thing, advantages and disadvantages. So Energy Transfer has proposed a project leveraging their existing capacity. And then I know, Kinder, who has developed several of the new 42-inch pipelines out of the Permian to the Gulf Coast, along with Whitewater Midstream, which led the development of the Whistler pipeline. But Kinder has recently on their earnings call spoken about their next pipeline out of the Permian, which I believe is Permian Highway or Permian Pass. I think it's Permian Pass. And they now are actively speaking about that again after a brief hiatus. largely due to diminished demand associated with the global pandemic. So there's two other active projects now to take gas to the east. I think that that could be advantageous to the San Juan producers because it will just mean there's less competition of growing supplies from the Permian for the San Juan producers. But I think the challenge that you see here is, the access to, I'll say at least our LNG project out of the San Juan is essentially a bit more limited because of the constraints of that drop down capacity. You effectively, your main option for getting gas to our project is on El Paso system. And we have to go through those crossovers to get it there, or we'd have to backhaul it to Waha in the Permian region and then come across on the Southern Main Line.
And the constraints are between Topak and Ehrenberg. Is that where there are constraints between Topak and Ehrenberg, and there are constraints on the other drop down that occurs closer to the Phoenix area. Okay, that's the Flagstaff to Phoenix
Yes.
coming down there. I'm sure Phoenix has a lot of demand in at least for electrical generation primarily, I'm guessing.
Yes, there's a significant electric generation load. Again, something that we're watching carefully. A lot of that load is, it's not base load, but it needs to be there, and they need the reliability for when those power plants have to run.
Sure.
And I think that's the real challenge that we have in today's market is, the building for the peak needs. And that raises a question about, well, what's the right resource mix? Unfortunately, this region really doesn't have much natural gas storage associated with it. The geology is fairly limited. But there's increasing interest in, I'll say battery storage and things of that nature, which may, be a bit more economic, particularly to meet the super peaks. But, batteries generally today, they're good for about 4 hours. And I expect technology is going to advance to make that longer, but they're not going to be there anytime soon for, periods of 3 days to a week or two.
Okay.
So I think these are some of the challenges that we're facing. Again, we have a mix of receipt points. We appreciate having that diversity. And if anyone wants to advance a producer push pipe out of the San Juan, we'll be all ears on that. I think the challenge that many of the San Juan producers have is, a lot of the majors who might advocate and support something like that have largely left the region. And
Right.
I know there's been discussions of I'll say the states stepping in and maybe collaborating, leveraging bonding authority and things of that nature to help provide the financial support for such a project. And again, that's something we're keenly interested. We always want more supply. We appreciate the value of diverse supply, and I'll change the topic to that in just a moment in slightly different context. But we are not likely ourselves to take, for ECA 1 at least, additional long haul capacity. However, there is a significant potential to put additional LNG volumes at ECA, as well as potentially an ammonia project, which would also consume natural gas. And there is also additional load from a power generation perspective and industrial perspective in Baja California, Mexico, that needs to be met. So I think there is an opportunity for additional infrastructure. And we, as a good neighbor, understand that those domestic needs need to be met as well. So if we do anything in terms of another project at ECO, whether it be LNG or ammonia or anything of that nature, we would work and collaborate with others to support and making sure that additional domestic needs in Mexico are in the Baja region are being met. I think many of you may be aware that CFE, which is the federal Mexican electric utility, is in a process right now where they have some new power plants that they want to put in Baja, and they are engaging in a process to secure new pipeline capacity into the region.
So they do that through the California CPUC, or do they do that through the FERC or Mexico?
No. The CFE, if it's capacity in Mexico, it is under the jurisdiction of the CRE, which is sort of the equivalent of the FERC in Mexico. And a lot of their regulations around pipelines are quite similar. They were largely modeled after the US, but they have their own nuances and differences based on some of the policies of the Mexican administration, policies and priorities. So CFE is running a process. I'll call it, they're going through an RFP type process. I don't know if that has started, or I know they've talked about it, but whether it's formally out there or it's coming out, where they're essentially saying, we would like capacity to meet the loads of these power plants in Baja, and they're seeking proposals for how to do that. Obviously, the regulatory jurisdiction would be driven by where that pipe would be built. In the US, if it's an interstate pipeline, it would be FERC. If it's an intrastate pipeline, it would be the state in which that pipe is located. And then the portion that's in Mexico would be subject to the CRE regulations.
Okay. Someone asked a question, and maybe you'll get to this towards the end, but how aligned will Sempra Infrastructure's purchases be with the lowest methane intensity production in the West?
Sure.
And it probably has to do with your diversity of supply too, you're kind of in that same sort of theme where you're going to next.
Yeah, well, why don't we go to that issue that you just raised?
And the slide popped up. There you go.
Okay, I think what I have to do, if I move off of full screen, it stays. So is it full screen now?
Yeah, it's lovely. It's great.
Okay, so you're raising a very good point. And a lot of this is going to go to the commercial terms of the SPAs and what our off-takers are demanding of us. So increasingly, globally, there is a concern around greenhouse gas emissions and therefore the carbon intensity of the fuels that are being consumed. The way our SPAs are written, I can't, because they're confidential, I can't go into the details of that. But, as Sempra is the gas supplier to the facility, I would imagine that if our off-takers come to us and say, we're putting our gas, the LNG of these particular cargoes are going into these markets, and these markets have placed a price on carbon, or we desire a certain carbon intensity, then we will work with them to achieve that. I'm not privy to those discussions, if they have started or if there's any provisions for that in our SPAs. I'm not aware of that. But I will simply say, as a business partner, and the fact that we have long-term strategic relationships with Total and Mitsui, they are two of the off-takers in our Cameron LNG project. So, and we have other projects that we have ongoing with them and other agreements with them. We would work together in order to meet their needs. I believe this is something that over the life of this, the 20-year SPAs, and the facilities probably have a 30 to a 40-year life. This will come up, and we're well aware of that, which is why Sempra was actively involved with the GIGNL group, and GIGNL is the global organization of natural gas importing facilities, or regasification. We worked with them a year ago, and we actually had two of our team members spend a lot of time on helping to establish the standards and the protocols that would be used for determining, what would be considered a net zero LNG cargo. And those standards, even though the intent was to focus on the net zero cargoes that were beginning to be traded around the world, whether it's net zero or it's some other form of carbon intensity measure, we were very active in trying to make sure that the standards were workable, that they're uniform and consistent, because we want liquidity in the marketplace. And so it's extremely important that, if you balkanize the market because country A has a certain standard and country B has a different way of how they measure, report, and verify, it really creates a lot of inertia in the market. It decreases liquidity and it increases costs. So those standards have been put in place. We are also very engaged with the Gas GTI, the Gas Technology Institute, and we were one of the founders of what's called Project Veritas, which is, again, their multi-year program to come up with the framework for how one can measure, verify, and report the carbon intensity of the molecules throughout the whole natural gas value chain in North America. And we very much aspire, again, to have a very consistent framework. We don't want to pick one technology over another. We want that framework to be technology neutral. And that project is up and running and has been now for a good 6 months, and it's a multi-year effort. So we do want to promote these frameworks to have transparency and consistency in carbon intensity of the various molecules, both in the US and North America gas markets, as well in the global LNG markets, because we believe it's important and it's very much coming.
Well, it would seem to me that you look at a various basin, and would you go all the way back to how the well or the group of wells was produced? Associated yes. Versus flaring versus really tight locations where there's no methane leakage, things like that?
Yes. Again, we believe that's where the market is going. We're not there today. I think one of the challenges is today it's very much a voluntary market. There are private entities that are, large gas buyers that are putting a value on this because ESG is very important at Sempra, and all our family of Sempra companies. We've made goals towards going to net zero, but the challenge that we have in the U.S. is there's no formal price put on carbon.
Right. We're working on that. I know
we are working on that. I think a lot more people in the industry are embracing this. If you look at API, the American Petroleum Institute, and how their positions have materially evolved over the last number of years, I think the view is everyone's now accepting this is coming. And so, the industry benefits from certainty. So help give us that certainty of what the value is. The uncertainty makes planning long-term infrastructure and long-term investments very difficult, and it materially increases the risk. Now, Europe has done a fair amount of work on what they call their carbon taxonomy, and that is beginning to be rolled out. And I believe that is because of the LNG cargoes, and the U.S. is now the largest supplier of LNG to Europe. That's going to start, as that gets implemented over the next number of years, that will then be putting a price on carbon intensity, and that will come back and start getting reflected in the U.S. market.
Do you think, aren't they paying a tax right now on
Yes.
some of those gas cargoes in Europe, UK, Germany, places like that? Aren't they already doing that? And to follow up that question, because of the high price of gas, have those carbon credits or carbon taxes been, or fees been waived?
So not to my knowledge, they have not been waived. There are regimes that exist to price carbon in Europe today. It's part of the broader European Union strategy. But exactly how that translates to, gas supply, and particularly into LNG, is still being worked out. And I think one of the challenges of that, and we'll move, and this slide is very much about Europe, but there's also global implications about that, is one of the least transparent organizations regarding carbon intensity is Russia and Gazprom. It is a complete black box in terms of what the carbon intensity of their natural gas is. And most interestingly, if you look at the current global situation, Europe is very heavily dependent on Russian gas supply. 35% of the continental demand is served by Russia. And then you have countries such as Germany and Italy that are almost half of their gas supply comes from Russia. And you're seeing the ramifications of that very much today. Yes, where gas prices in Europe are more than 10 times what they are here in the US. Imagine paying $30 and $40 a decatherm for your natural gas. That is what's going on in Europe today. It can also be higher than that. Now, as many of you probably have seen in the international news, for many years, this Nord Stream 2 project, which is a massive pipeline coming down through the North Sea into Europe, which would have supplied 7 to 8 BCF a day of Russian source gas supply into Germany. It is now fully constructed. Prior to Russia's recent actions, the pipe was waiting to be certified for operations by first Germany and then by the European Union. There are a lot of issues with respect to Nord Stream 2. So it was been controversial for many years. You've probably seen, the Biden administration and the Trump administration doing various things with regard to this. But in the end, prior to Russia's recent aggression and their war efforts in Ukraine, Germany essentially was hesitant to certify the pipeline because of the requirements in Europe, much as in the US, that there be separation between the transporter of the pipe and the commodity supplier. And Gazprom took some steps to address that. Essentially, they were going to set up an affiliate that would be the marketer of the gas to separate it from the pipe. But Germany didn't completely buy that. And so they refused to certify it. And now, given Russia's aggression in Ukraine, essentially the European Union and Germany have concluded that they will not bring this pipe into service. Well, that eliminates 7 to 8 BCF a day of gas that Europe and particularly Germany needs in order to meet, its objectives of eliminating coal. Germany, they're eliminating nuclear power as well. That's roughly 8% of US production. And so this has created a huge opportunity for US LNG. Where previously, the big focus was mostly in the growth in Asia. Now, given energy security concerns and our alliances with Europe, that opportunity in Asia hasn't gone away, but we also are faced with this more immediate opportunity in Europe. So, now all of a sudden there's being a price paid on energy security and supply diversity, which is going to be very advantageous to US sourced LNG. The other thing that has not seen as much in the news as the supply diversity has really been, the renewable energy and batteries as well, in terms of potential supply chain issues associated with those technologies, particularly around the rare earths and the metals and things that are required for renewable energy and battery production. And what you see here in this graph, and just to simplify it, because there's a lot of detail here, China has an amazingly high percentage of the market, particularly for where these metals are processed. Copper, 40%, nickel, 35%, cobalt, 65% coming from being processed in China. Rare earths, 87%, and lithium, 58%. So clearly huge control and influence over these metals that are integral to batteries and renewable energy. And then if you go back to where some of this stuff is sourced, large concentrations, the Congo, 65% of cobalt, and Australia, more than half of the lithium market. These should create, huge concerns, and I think they're getting increased visibility now with regard to energy security as we move towards more and more renewable energy and battery storage being part of our energy mix.
That's a really good point. It's amazing.
Yes, and so a lot of this goes to. I know we've heard themes over my lifetime about buying American. The pandemic made it extremely clear that concentrations in various countries of supply chains can wreak havoc on the market. So, we talked briefly about supply diversity with regard to our natural gas supply for our LNG projects. Here's an example, of other supply diversity concerns, because first and foremost, we want our LNG to be competitive, we want it to be reliable, and we want it to be clean. Sometimes those three things are at odds with each other, and you do need to pay a premium. It's understood. You might be paying a premium for it to be clean, and you're probably paying a premium for greater diversity. But in the end, that gives you reliability. And so you need, you put a price on that reliability, and those things need to balance out. And exactly how all that works, Sempra prefers to work with the more sophisticated off-takers that understand these things, that they're willing to put a price on that. And we're very willing to work with them to achieve those objectives.
Well, and I think what you did mention here is if you do a full scale analysis of a battery, for instance, that's going to be put in the Mojave Desert of California with to store energy. If you did a full scale analysis and you put all these metals and everything that goes into that, you would probably find it's probably worse for the climate change situation. Would you agree with that? Full scale analysis.
Yes.
I think that's what so many people think, that if we just put everything in batteries, the general public thinks that if things are going to be good, we just get it from the electricity. Yet the cost for the climate and for the environment is humongous. Not to mention tearing up the lands here in these sort of places which you mentioned. So, anything else you'd like to wrap up with? Any other comments?
Yeah, happy to take any questions, but I think diversity is extraordinarily important in all dimensions, whether it be natural gas supply to our LNG facilities, whether it be energy supply into any particular region.
Well, I think where we're positioned in the San Juan Basin and Western U.S. gas, I think. I would get on testify at a hearing or wherever and say that we produce, I think, the cleanest energy in the world, cleanest hydrocarbons in the world with natural gas and the kind of scrutiny that we're under these days, which is really for the betterment. I don't want to put emissions out there, and as a independent producer, we want to be the best stewards of our environment as we can. So, really appreciate your time, Jim. Some of the people shuttled some questions in there, so that's where I was getting some of those things. So we wanted to know if the slides were available. We had a couple of questions about those. If you could make those available to our listeners.
Yeah, I'm happy, Jerry. I'll PDF these slides and send them over to you later today.
Okay, that's great. We'll send out a recording of this if people want to look at this again. And really appreciate your time. And I think for people who want to see more of the RBN network, they have a blog out today on what's going on with the new FERC policy things, which you and I talked about on the pregame. And so I think that was a positive thing that you had thought it happened at FERC February 17th with Commissioner Glick. Is that right?
Well, yeah, the chair, but the full commission issued the new certificate policy, which is something that had been in the works for a while. Are there challenging things in there? The answer is yes. There are new challenges for us. However, I commend the commission, the commissioner, for moving this out as quickly as he could, to issue something like that when, the composition of the commission changed and the new commissioner just came on in December, and to achieve agreement on that in a matter of a couple of months. It's progress because at least, with regard to the certificate policy, there's greater clarity about what we are dealing with going forward. And it's far better to have that clarity, even if we don't like all the aspects of it, than to be living under continued uncertainty of what this new policy statement was going to be.
Well, you're involved in many tentacles and aspects of our energy business, and as your plant is getting developed in Mexico, it's really something to look forward to for Western U.S. gas. And thank you, Jim, especially. I feel like we just got the tip of the iceberg here on what we talked about, but opens us up for really learning more about what's going on West Coast LNG exports. So I enjoy this a lot. Thanks, everybody. I just get back to my regular day job at San Juan Resources. So bye for now. Thank you.